There's a specific kind of suffering that belongs uniquely to modern life. A suffering so pervasive that Carl Jung identified it as the general neurosis of our time. It's not depression, though it often looks like it. It's not anxiety, though it certainly creates that. It's something more existentially disturbing, the growing realization that you're living someone else's life. You're in the career your parents envisioned for you, not the one your soul calls for. You're maintaining the lifestyle your culture demands, not the one that actually fulfills you. You're performing the personality that gains social acceptance, not expressing who you authentically are. You've built an entire existence around being what others need you to be, and in the process you've buried who you actually are so deep that you can barely remember they exist. Jung observed this phenomenon constantly in his practice, and what he discovered should terrify and liberate you in equal measure. As he noted, about a third of my cases are suffering from no clinically definable neurosis, but from the senselessness and emptiness of their lives. These weren't people with chemical imbalances or traumatic childhoods requiring treatment. These were successful, intelligent, accomplished people who had done everything right and felt completely wrong. They had the career, the marriage, the house, the status. They had checked all the boxes that society told them would lead to fulfillment, and yet they sat in Jung's office feeling hollow, disconnected. Like actors who'd been playing a role for so long, they'd forgotten there was a real person underneath the costume. They felt, in Jung's words, the senselessness and emptiness of their lives. Not because their lives were objectively meaningless, but because they were living lives that weren't actually theirs. This is what Jung meant by the persona, the mask we wear to be acceptable to society. The persona itself isn't the problem. We all need social masks to function. The catastrophe occurs when you become so identified with the persona that you mistake it for your actual self. When the mask becomes the only identity, you know. When you've performed for so long that you can't remember what it feels like not to perform. And here's the truly disturbing part. Most people don't even realize they're doing it. They genuinely believe the persona is them. They think the career they're performing is what they wanted. They convince themselves the life they're living is their choice. They've internalized others' expectations so completely that those expectations feel like their own authentic desires. But the unconscious knows the truth, and it will not be silenced forever. It expresses itself through symptoms that Jung recognized immediately. The vague depression that medication doesn't touch, the anxiety that has no clear source, the physical ailments that doctors can't explain, the sense of meaninglessness despite external success, the feeling of being an imposter in your own life, the desperate midlife crisis that seems to come from nowhere, the addictions that numb the pain of self-betrayal, the relationships that feel hollow because you're not actually present in them. As Jung stated with devastating clarity, neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. What he meant is profound. The vague psychological suffering you experience, the depression, anxiety, emptiness, is actually your psyche's way of avoiding the specific, acute pain of facing a brutal truth. You've abandoned yourself. You've sacrificed your authentic nature for acceptance, security, and approval, and that abandonment creates a wound that no amount of external success can heal. The legitimate suffering you're avoiding is the pain of admitting, this isn't my life. I've been living according to scripts written by my parents, my culture, my society. I've spent years, maybe decades, building something that looks impressive but feels empty because it was never actually mine. This truth is excruciating to face because it means that all those years of achievement, all that hard work, all those sacrifices, they weren't taking you toward yourself. They were taking you away from yourself. Let's look at how this happens, because understanding the mechanism is the first step toward liberation. It begins in childhood, when you learn which parts of yourself gain approval and which parts must be hidden. Maybe you were naturally creative and expressive, but your family valued logic and practicality, so you learned to suppress your artistic nature. Maybe you were sensitive and emotional, but your culture demanded stoicism, so you buried your feelings. Maybe you were ambitious and powerful, but your environment punished female assertiveness, so you learned to make yourself small. Whatever it was, you adapted. You developed a persona, a version of yourself that got love, acceptance, approval, and you pushed everything else into what Jung called the shadow, the parts of yourself that were deemed unacceptable. This wasn't conscious. You didn't decide, I'm going to pretend to be someone I'm not. You genuinely became the persona because that's how children survive. But what works for survival in childhood becomes a prison in adulthood. The persona that protected you at 7 is suffocating you at 37. The adaptations that earned love when you were powerless now prevent authentic connection when you're autonomous. The mask that helped you fit in is now the barrier keeping you from finding where you actually belong. And here's what makes this truly insidious. The world rewards your persona. Society loves masks. Your family is proud of the successful persona you've become. Your friends admire the life you've built. Your colleagues respect the professional image you project. Everyone confirms that you're doing great, except the voice deep inside that knows you're living someone else's dream while your own dreams remain buried. Jung identified a specific moment when this crisis typically intensifies: midlife. What worked in your 20s and 30s, building, achieving, establishing yourself according to external standards, stops working in your 40s and beyond. The psyche demands a shift from external achievement to internal authenticity, from building what looks good to living what feels true. This is why midlife crisis happens. It's not about aging or mortality fear, though those play a role. It's your authentic self, which you've been suppressing for decades, finally demanding to be lived. It's your soul saying, we're running out of time. You need to stop living for them and start living for me. And when people ignore this call, when they double down on the persona and keep performing, Jung observed that neurosis generally intensifies. But the crisis isn't the problem. It's the solution trying to emerge, the depression, the anxiety, the sense that something's profoundly wrong. These aren't signs of illness. They're signs of health. They're your psyche's way of saying, pay attention. You're off course. This isn't your life. Come back to yourself before it's too late. Jung was particularly disturbed by one aspect of this dynamic, captured in his haunting observation. Nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their environment, and especially on their children, than the unlived life of the parent. Think about what this means. When you don't live your authentic life, when you suppress your true nature to maintain a socially acceptable persona, you don't just harm yourself, you unconsciously transmit that unlived potential to your children. Your children inherit your unlived dreams, your suppressed talents, your denied desires. They feel the weight of your unexpressed self and often try to live it for you, or they repeat the same pattern of self-abandonment they witnessed in you. As Jung stated, if I did not respond fully to my life's purpose and challenges, then they would be inherited by my children, who would have to bear the burden of my unlived life in addition to their own difficulties. This is why breaking the pattern isn't just about you, it's about breaking a generational cycle of self-betrayal. When you reclaim your authentic life, you give your children permission to live theirs. When you stop performing and start being real, you model what genuine living looks like. When you face the legitimate suffering of admitting you've been off course and make the difficult changes necessary to realign, you show them that it's never too late to come home to yourself. But how do you know if you're living someone else's life? Jung offered several indicators, and I want you to honestly assess whether these describe your experience. Do you feel successful by external measures but empty inside? Do you achieve goals that don't actually satisfy you? Do you find yourself wondering, is this all there is? Despite having everything you're supposed to want, do you feel like you're playing a role rather than living authentically? Do you experience yourself as an imposter waiting to be exposed? Do you sense that if people knew the real you, they wouldn't accept you? Do you feel most alive in moments that don't fit your official identity? Do you have dreams, interests, or desires that you dismiss as impractical or selfish? Do you experience chronic low-level depression or anxiety that has no clear cause? Do you feel trapped in a life that looks good but feels wrong? If you answered yes to most of these, Jung would say you're living through your persona rather than from your authentic self. You've built a life that satisfies others' expectations while starving your own soul, and the symptoms you're experiencing, the emptiness, the anxiety, the sense of meaninglessness, aren't problems to be medicated away. They're messengers demanding that you pay attention. So what do you do? How do you reclaim your life when you've been living someone else's for so long that you can barely remember what yours would look like? Jung's answer is both simple and terrifyingly difficult. You must undergo what he called individuation, the process of becoming who you actually are rather than who you think you should be. This isn't about self-improvement or becoming better. It's about becoming real. It's about withdrawing your energy from the persona and redirecting it toward your authentic self. This process begins with brutal honesty. You must be willing to look at your life and ask, how much of this is actually mine? Which choices did I make from authentic desire versus fear of judgment? Which parts of my identity are real versus performed? What dreams did I abandon to maintain acceptability? What aspects of myself did I bury to fit in? These questions are uncomfortable because the answers threaten your entire current life structure. You might realize that your prestigious career is actually your father's dream, not yours. You might recognize that your comfortable marriage is based on who you were pretending to be when you met, not who you actually are. You might see that your carefully constructed lifestyle is designed to impress others rather than fulfill you. And then comes the truly difficult part, making changes, not superficial changes like buying a sports car or having an affair. Jung called these false solutions that avoid the real work. Real changes mean potentially disappointing people who are invested in your persona. It means risking the security of a life that looks good for the uncertainty of a life that feels true. It means choosing authentic suffering, the grief of facing how far you've strayed, the pain of disappointing others, the fear of not knowing who you'll become over neurotic suffering. But Jung witnessed countless times that when people have the courage to reclaim their authentic lives, something miraculous happens. As he observed, if they are enabled to develop into more spacious personalities, the neurosis generally disappears. Not through medication or positive thinking, but through living truthfully. The depression lifts when you stop abandoning yourself. The anxiety decreases when you stop betraying your nature. The sense of meaninglessness dissolves when you start living your actual purpose rather than performing someone else's script. This doesn't mean you destroy everything you've built. Sometimes individuation requires external life changes, but often it's an internal shift, bringing more of your authentic self into the structures you've already created. Maybe you keep your career, but finally pursue it in the way that feels true to you, rather than performing it for others' approval. Maybe you stay in your relationship, but start showing up as your real self, rather than your accommodating persona. Maybe you maintain your lifestyle, but stop using it to prove something to others and start enjoying it for yourself. The key is that your choices must come from internal authenticity rather than external validation. You must learn to ask, what do I actually want, rather than what should I want? You must develop the capacity to disappoint others when living authentically requires it. You must be willing to be misunderstood, criticized, rejected for being real, rather than accepted for being fake. Jung also emphasized something crucial. This work cannot be done alone. We need what he called genuine relationship to support individuation. People who can see and reflect back our authentic selves, who challenge our personas rather than confirming them, who love us for who we are rather than who we're pretending to be. This is why therapy was central to Jung's practice. It provided a relationship where the authentic self could emerge without judgment. But you also need to cultivate this capacity within yourself, to be the witness of your own life, to notice when you're performing, versus being to catch yourself betraying your truth, to maintain approval, to redirect your energy from persona maintenance to authentic expression. This is the practice of individuation. Not a one-time event, but a daily discipline of choosing authenticity over acceptability. One final truth Jung discovered that offers both warning and hope. Time is running out. Not in a morbid sense, but in a practical one. Every year you spend living someone else's life is a year of your actual life not lived. Every day you maintain the persona is a day your authentic self remains in exile. And as Jung observed, this unlived life doesn't just disappear. It haunts you, creates symptoms, gets transmitted to the next generation. But the flip side is equally true. It's never too late to reclaim your life. Jung witnessed people at 60, 70, even 80, finally having the courage to become who they actually are. And the transformation, even late in life, was profound. Because living even 1 year authentically is more nourishing than living 40 years performing. If you've recognized yourself in this exploration, if you've felt the disturbing truth that you might be living someone else's life, if you're ready to stop performing and start being real, then the invitation is clear. Stop waiting for permission. Stop waiting for the right time. Stop waiting for circumstances to change. The legitimate suffering you've been avoiding, the pain of facing how far you've strayed and making the difficult changes to realign, is waiting for you. And on the other side of that suffering lies your actual life. Write in the comments, "I reclaim my authentic life," and commit to the difficult work of individuation. Share this with someone living a life that isn't theirs. Your authentic self has been waiting in exile. Will you finally bring it home?